So taking you back down under, now we've been up over for a little bit, there's not too many countries in the world where you can have the animals wandering through the shop. Now, people in Australia, visitors to Australia, love this sort of quirky business. We can get Aussie animals, baby Aussie animals. You can pick them up. You can be there at their birth. You can do all sorts of things. Now, Joseph, I believe, as a qualified zookeeper, is planning a few little animal reptile displays at your new museum, eh, Joe? I think that'd be great
Absolutely.
when you finally get to them. And the kids, they just respond incredibly. In fact, Joe and I have taken snakes to school classrooms and all sorts of interesting things. In fact, even to a church. Quite amazing. You can come to Australia and you can meet these creatures in Eastern Australia, up in the gum trees. They love the blossoms and they add a lot both to the colour and to the, well, they are hard to see in the wild because they mix in so well. It's like a soldier's, absolutely ornate uniform, except that it breaks up his outline. Look at those beautiful birds. And they do love the gum tree blossoms. And they can be quite inquisitive. Well, this is Australia. This is down under. This is one of these interesting places down under if you can afford an extra day or two to go visit it. Oh, there's plenty of rocks, so we know a lot about its geology. There's all sorts of interesting layers, including some modern sand deposits. And, well, there's one of our long-term photographers. So don't thank me for these pictures. This is John Bean and his wife, Glenn, long-term friends and supporters of the ministry. So many of our creatures, they specialize in animal creatures, are done by them. Thank you, including that one. Oh, what's that one? That's an extinct critter off the coast of Australia, the Lord Howe turtle. Notice it's a really horny turtle. Extinct, you might be glad about that. There's all sorts of interesting living and extinct creatures in the Australian zone. You know what that is? It's a koala. When was it? Well, a friend of mine took this picture a few years back. That's a couple of years ago now. It's a koala rushing into the surf, just off the islands here in Eastern Australia, out there on the beach. As to why it's doing it, we've discovered that he wants to get rid of his fleas. If he can't eat enough gum trees, eucalyptus oil, which makes their blood taste pretty awful to the fleas and that, they'll use the surf to go for a wash. Now, I'll guarantee that's not in your textbook, but they do it. And they sleep a lot. Eucalyptus oil is the same cause. It makes them very sleepy. It makes them totally inactive for 18 hours a day, and they're pretty hard to wake up. And if you wake them up in the day, watch out for a bad temper. And of course, you can go to Southern Australia or Eastern Australia, even Western Australia, and meet our rather unique black swans, the ones that Captain Cook struggled with, because everyone knew swans were white. Well, that's all they were used to. But in Australia, they're black. But if Captain Cook had joined Charles Darwin and they'd travel around the world, you'd find that Aussie swans are actually black with a little bit of white and red. If you go to South America, you find swans are actually mostly white, but they've got black necks. And if you go to England, you will find that they have black nodules above their beaks, but there's almost no black on the rest of them. Now, these are used as examples of evolution, but they're not even as varied as cabbages. Keep that in mind. You can produce hundreds of varieties, even in the same species. So most of what Darwin is talking about are not evidence of evolution, but variation, sometimes not even with its own kind, sometimes within its own species. Now, I've encouraged you over the years to try and get all of these differences in a perspective. And the perspective begins there. God made us. He made man in his image. We think because God thinks. We speak because God speaks. Male and female, we were created by God. We didn't happen by evolution. We didn't happen by ourselves. And last week, we reminded you that you therefore need to think the way Jesus thinks, because the Bible talks about a problem called sin. When Ravi and the others deal with why, what about this, what about that, mostly at the basis of our doubts, my doubts, Joseph's doubts, everybody's doubts, is the fact that we have a problem called sin that's very real. So we need to have the thinking power, the thinking picture that's in the mind of Jesus Christ, which you'll only get by humbling yourself and asking him for that. Okay, now, one of the ways we'll be doing this, I need to remind you here that last week we dealt with a few polystrates, particularly as I was preaching over the weekend down on the Gold Coast. And on the 27th, 28th, depending on whether you're in America or in Australia, we'll be dealing with this issue, the polystrate trees, the ones I've found over the years. And George's question that was sent in, what's inside them? Are they permineralized? Are they fossilized? Are they hollow? We'll cover them all. And we'll be dealing with the leaning ones and how they get to be like that. So if you want a great program, go to SFT, see when we'll be on, 26th, 27th of October, not too far away, and it'll be a great program on creation and the flood and these fossil trees. And I would remind you, yes, thank you guys who've sent all sorts of weird and wonderful things in with your donation today. Send your donations in. The program needs your help. The research needs your help. You have questions? We will have a question time coming up at the end of this next one. Okay, down under, up over is our topic today. My turn is back down under. Here's some of those nice little wombats. Kids love them. Farmers hate them. They can dig huge holes. The bigger the wombat, the bigger the hole, the faster you fall down it. And of course, they are built like tanks. Most of you don't appreciate how heavy a wombat can get. And when you hit it, it leaves a distinct wombat-shaped impression in your car. Often you come off worse than it does. And of course, they have two front teeth, hence their name, Diprotodontus. Here's one of their fossil relatives. That's in our collection. The owner passed on to be with the Lord a little while ago, and he donated this to our Creation Museum. See on the left-hand side, two front teeth. There's a fossil wombat at the top and a present-day wombat down at the bottom. They used to be bigger, now they're smaller. They're cousins, the Diprotodonts. In fact, they're all Diprotodontia from kangaroos onwards. They used to be monsters. Now they're mostly midgets. The trend that Craig was talking about shows up. It shows up in your Bible, Genesis 1 to 11, remember? That's the history Craig was mentioning. Created perfection, a fall where sin came in, then Noah's flood, then massive climate change, all the way down to nations and tribes, which leave us with the puzzle, how did the Chinese know the world would end by fire, and down to us today. And we can talk about the record God has given us, which does include an end judgment by fire. It's not that. That's the popular belief system, but it's absolute 100% faith-based, blind faith-based. Dawkins' faith is blind. Christian faith is fact-based. It begins there. In the beginning, God created? No, we weren't there to see it. So by faith, you believe that. By faith, you believe that God created. But you see, he's told you there's plenty of evidence. That's what the book of Romans is about. The evidence is so clear, even you unbelievers can see it. Even you atheists understand it. And even you agnostics will be held accountable by God because of the evidence. There's a bit you need to know, because you could never conclude that just by watching the world today, where Putin and the Ukrainians are fighting each other to the death. Everything God made was very good, war not included. And then there's that bit. All things were made by and for Christ. So we're trying to look at Australian animals. Koalas, they love the gum leaves. You can even make them get on the back of your dog. I've got heaps of koalas in my backyard. They're cute, but they got long claws and two thumbs on each hand. They're interesting. They're different. They're not found anywhere else. How come? They're in Australia. They certainly are great tourist attractions, and they are a very good way of raising money in Australia, provided you treat them with respect and you don't try and wake them up in the middle of their sleep. Everything that God made was very good. That's got to be your starting point. I don't apologize for that. That's what the biblical record says, and it's the record of the God who was there. And then he tells you you can see the evidence and you'll be held accountable to him because of it. There's John Bean. Look at that cute little possum on his shoulder. There's a possum I found in my library storage shed. I decided to make friends with him. How do you keep them? They love dark holes. Sometimes they're very tiny. They love to eat sweet things. Look at these variety of possums that are in Australia. Oh, possums do exist elsewhere, and you find fossil possums in Canada. You find fossil platypus in Canada. You find fossil platypus in South America. Amazing. Oh, they like to eat sweet things. This guy's eaten a bit too much, don't you think? Too many sweet things. Actually, it's the tourists who are killing these by the fact they love to feed them things they shouldn't be eating. You see, in the beginning, all creatures ate plants. Do you have a perspective when you're trying to explain Australian animals, how they got there, how long ago it was, that there was no death or suffering in the beginning? The quolls didn't attack other animals and tear them to pieces. The Tasmanian tigers didn't scratch and bite and spread cancer. There was no death and there was no suffering. We've got the world's biggest chickens. Aren't they cute? Now, they are a type of bird that's found in South Africa and they're found in South America, different species, different varieties, but the same sort of creature. Yep, emus can't fly and they're very shy. So if you want to get close up, you need to do that. Or you need a good telephoto lens, or you need to do something stupid. They are inquisitive. They will walk up to you to see what you're doing, provided you keep dead still. Ah, amazing. Yep. How was that picture taken? Do you realize you can get them up close if you lie in the grass, put your feet up, wiggle your toes? They'll come over to see why you are actually in the grass and you can get some good close up pictures. But when you dig up their fossils, they used to be bigger and now they're smaller. Emus, and this is from the Australian Museum's book on giant fossils, they used to be bigger, now they're smaller. Okay, the biblical picture includes that. God said to Adam, because you've disobeyed me, because you ate the tree from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge, you'll go back to dust, and dust is not very good if you want to stay alive. You catching it? When God made the world, it was very good. Don't blame him for what's gone wrong. It was in perfect shape when he gave it to our hands. Of course, you'll find the koalas and the kangaroos at our theme parks, and the kangaroos love to come and have their share of your McDonald's fries. But can I warn you? Don't give the little baby Joey a push and shove him away because Dad's watching. And Dad is really good at boxing. And those big long claws on its feet, no, they won't tear each other apart. They have reinforced stomach pads, but you don't. And they range in size right down to the tiny little, well, look how small that guy is. They range in size from that tiny up to the tree climbing kangaroos, up to the, well, 1 meter high black faces, all the way up to the 2 meter high giant reds. Now, these mainly live in the outback because it's a bit hard for them to fit in the jungles, and they have to be able to hop. So they migrate very well out on the plains. But you see the fossil on the left? That's how big they used to be. There's a giant grey on the right, as tall as me. You see, that's change, but it's not evolution. Now, the Bible includes good examples of change, including lifespan. Methuselah, who knew Adam and who knew Noah, lived 969 years. Wow! And he died. But you see, the dying bit is not very good. But then Adam's sin brought death. God told him how to avoid it, but he didn't. Everything God made was very good, and good did not include death. Why am I stressing that? You theistic evolutionists need to wake up to yourself. Your theory includes death as part of the process. And God said, no, I created man. I created all these creatures, and it was very good. There was no death, no suffering. From creation to Noah's flood, a daily mist watered the earth. You're wondering how long they could live and why? Take the climate that God made, the one that was very good. This one, well, that's outside of Rockhampton. It's not very good. See how dry it is? Go up into that gum tree type forest. There's a cliff. Climbing these sort of things keeps me moderately healthy in my old age. Yep, have to acknowledge it now. The district nurse visited me the other day and said, now you're 75, you get a free ECG. Not that I asked for it. You can get your heart checked. You get all of these things all for free. There are some advantages in living to be a fossil. But you see the actual trees there, fossil trees, buried in the midst of rounded stones. These are stream flood deposited. They haven't worn down to be tiny, so they didn't spend too long in the stream, but they were quickly buried, and it was a flood type deposit, buried amidst fossil trees that have turned to stone. But at the moment, you don't know how big they are until you get up on the top. There's my friend Eric. You see, he's touching the stem of a tree. Well, it turns out the stem of a tree ended up being huge. There's one of my daughters. There's another one a bit further back. There's Mr. Eric way back in the distance. No, we didn't discover this tree. It was found by an oil drilling rig, and it turned out to be 130 meters long, nearly 410 feet on the non-metric scale, and it was 30 meters around, and it was a giant fossil pine tree. We found quite a few of them. Well, not me personally, I've only ever seen that one, but I've seen this one in the museum, the Dinosaur Museum out at Winton. Oh, that's not the whole tree, that's just a branch. Look what they say. It's a 100-million-year-old conifer tree branch. Now, we don't have any pine trees, conifer trees, with branches that big today. Now, I don't believe the 100 million years old, but the fact is, it's easy to prove it's a conifer because it just looks like conifers today. And it's easy to prove it was huge. The rest of it's still in the ground, and this is one branch. Now, to give you an idea, I made up this diagram for America to give it first. The man was 6 feet, nearly 2 meters tall. Put him beside a jumbo jet. You know, the ones that were put out to pasture a couple of years ago now, 250 feet, 6 feet long. There's the man at the left-hand side. Now put the tree in the picture. Now that's a tree. You realize in a world that had a mist every morning, there was no floods. So the climate change is a post-flood event. The climate change in Victoria that's flooding everywhere didn't happen in the first world. You didn't get washed away or snapped off by hurricanes. It didn't happen. Things are so different now. By the time you get to the flood, only Noah and those with him on the ark remained alive. Everything was very good, not for the people who didn't make it onto the ark. You see, don't blame God for a bad world. Everything he made was very good. If Ravi and the others want to know what's wrong with the planet, look in a mirror. It's us. Well, my mum used to take me to the museum every year. Once a year, we would go a long way into the city, and took a long time in those days. No fast transport. We didn't have a car. And I watched this experiment. Lungfish. Why lungfish? Well, our lungfish in the one river system they were in struggling. They'd built dams. We'd had lots of droughts. The lungfish were in trouble. So the scientists took them and they put them in growth ponds, and they were multiplying them in-house and then releasing them again. Well, the good news is that decent-sized lungfish and his descendants have survived very well, so the lungfish is no longer on the endangered system. He's not going to become extinct. Well, what's interesting is the lungfish, because he's had so many experiments done on him, we know a lot about him. We know that he never stops growing. He grows pretty fast in his immaturity. Then he'll keep growing, but very slow. There's a picture of present-day lungfish. There he is compared to the fossil lungfishes. He used to be a monster. Now he's a midget. Now, if you want a good interpretation of this, I'm pretty sure it tells you lungfishes used to live much longer on average. But then the Bible says so did people. And the last one you've got a decent record of is Moses, who was 120 years old when he died. Now, you might think, wow, that's a long life. Well, not compared to Methuselah, it's not. So even humans have lived shorter lives. But Moses, why did he die? Well, it's certainly true when he died, it wasn't very good, because we know why he died. He didn't die of old age. It says Moses, being 120 years old, was sound in body. He had the body of a young man still. But you see, Moses sinned. And as a leader, I'm sorry, but you see, God gives leaders more privileges, but he also gives them more responsibilities. Moses disobeyed God in a simple thing like the instructions he gave to rocks to bring forth water. Moses said, do I have to bring forth water? No, Moses could never do that. It was God who did that, and Moses forgot to give credit. Moses sinned, and the wages of sin is death. Moses didn't die because he was old. He died because he sinned. Well, We have a few crocodile hunters in Australia. Here's one I used to know by Robbie. Look at his friend the crocodile. Robbie discovered ages ago that if you hit a crocodile on the nose, it accepts you as its leader. You can do things like that. By the way, the croc can't turn around and bite you because its head and its neck are not very flexible. Of course, you probably wouldn't be willing to take the risk. But Robbie's discovered that the pictures of crocodiles in the caves the Aborigines painted, they used to be bigger. But then the fossils did too. 100-year-old croc on the right, fossil croc. How old? I suspect it used to be really old. And if you can't get the picture yet, here's a croc, present day one, beside a man. There's a fossil croc. They used to be monsters, now they're midgets. Of course, in the early days, they only ate plants and plant food. You say, that's not possible. Look at their teeth. Well, even today, the baby crocs will swim up the rivers and they will collect a pile of stones in their stomach, and it's because they can't chew, they can only rip. Whether they leap out of the water and they grab fruit, which they're known to do, they still can't chew it up. The stones in their stomach actually act as a rolling mill. Amazing. They can, just like the giant megalodons, they can digest plant food. Change is true. What's the point Craig made? What's the point Joseph's made? The point Diane has made? That is not evolution. Variation even within a species for animals, as well as for plants, as well as human beings. You saw the Chinese lady back at the start. She's not a different species. She certainly has what appear to be different eye shapes. But perhaps it's just due to the percentage of fat in the top half of her eyelid, and it's not even a mutation in the normal sense. Can I encourage you? Support our research. Join us on the 26th or the 27th of October, and I'd encourage you, come in now with your questions as to why they may have been so big or how did all this happen.